In the spring of 1802, two messages began circulating through the slave quarters of eastern North Carolina and Virginia. The first came from the rivers, passed in whispers between ferrymen and boatmen who worked the waterways connecting plantations. The second came from the swamps, from a man who called himself General and commanded an armed camp deep in a wilderness so dangerous that even bloodhounds refused to enter. Both messages said the same thing: when Easter comes, we rise. Welcome to Historic Crimes TV, where you get the true story of events that have happened in the past, which helped shape the history of the world that we are living in. Before we begin, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The conspiracy began not in the swamps, but on the rivers. Sancho was a ferryman, a bondman whose work required extensive absence from his home plantation. This was no accident. In 1800, he had been involved in Gabriel's Rebellion, the massive conspiracy that nearly brought Richmond to its knees. Gabriel, a literate blacksmith, had organized hundreds of enslaved people to march on the Virginia capital, seize the governor, and negotiate their freedom. The plot was betrayed at the last moment. 27 conspirators were hanged, but Sancho escaped detection. Now, 2 years later, he was trying again. Unlike Gabriel, Sancho sought to enlist a small, dedicated group of followers, using his mobility as a ferryman to do so. As he moved up and down the James River between plantations, he could speak freely with other watermen, boatmen, and skilled slaves who traveled for their work. These men formed a natural communications network. They moved between counties, heard news from different areas, and could organize without arousing suspicion. The goals of the uprising included freedom, the right to earnings, and equitable distribution of property. This wasn't just about escape, it was about overthrowing the entire system. The date was set: Good Friday, April 2nd, 1802, or possibly Easter Monday. The confusion about the exact date would prove telling. This conspiracy was already more chaotic than Gabriel's had been. Sancho was recruited in Halifax County, Virginia, near the North Carolina border. He found willing conspirators: Absalom, Frank, Martin, Jim, and a woman named Phoebe. The plan began to spread. While Sancho organized the river network, something more terrifying was brewing in the Great Dismal Swamp. Tom Copper set up an armed camp called New Begun deep in the swamp. He proclaimed himself General of the Maroons, the escaped slaves who had built hidden communities on elevated islands throughout the 2,000-square-mile wilderness. Copper threatened to kill the white people, and Tom Copper offered a paper to all to sign that would join him. This was different from Sancho's conspiracy. Copper wasn't planning to negotiate. He was building an army. Copper sent written messages to find fighters and collect bullets and weapons. His network extended across the Virginia-North Carolina border, connecting with Maroon communities throughout the swamp region. Some historians believe these networks had existed for decades, with escaped slaves living in the swamp for 30 years or more. The swamp itself was a fortress. Horses couldn't navigate it. Canoes got stuck in the sucking mud. Venomous snakes, bears, and impenetrable undergrowth made pursuit nearly impossible. And within it, on scattered islands of dry ground, hundreds of people lived beyond the reach of slavery, growing corn and rice, hunting, and raiding nearby plantations for supplies. By April, rumors were everywhere. The conspiracy that had started as Sancho's focused plot had grown massive and uncontrolled. Word spread from Halifax County south into North Carolina. Counties began lighting up with panic. Halifax and C, Northampton, Hertford, Camden, Currituck, Pasquotank, Bertie. In Halifax County, Virginia, authorities arrested conspirators in early April. The trials began. Sancho, Absalom, Frank, and Martin were convicted of advising, consulting, and conspiring to rebel and make insurrection. But then something unexpected happened. Abram, a co-conspirator, supplied information to authorities. He tried to save himself by betraying others. It didn't work. He was also sentenced to death after others testified against him. But now the authorities knew the conspiracy extended far beyond Halifax. The second wave hit northeastern North Carolina in mid-May, like a tidal wave of terror. On May 15th, 2 enslaved men were arrested, tried, and hanged in Camden County, all on the same day. A week later, 2 more were hanged in Currituck County. The Norfolk Herald reported, "It is expected that many will suffer at Elizabeth City, the jail of which place is full of Negroes." In Pasquotank County, an enslaved man named Mingo became a key witness. Mingo implicated a number of slaves on a charge of conspiracy and said that they had a hideout in a nearby swamp. The militia was called out. A special court convened on May 22nd. The testimony was chilling. Enslaved people spoke of night meetings in fields, of passwords and signals, of plans to kill the white people. They mentioned leaders, a man named Gain belonging to Mrs. and Turner, Bob belonging to Mr. Stone, men gathering powder and making swords from scythes. They spoke of connections to Virginia, to the Great Dismal Swamp, to Tom Coppa's camp. After trying 3 leaders whom Mingo pointed out, without discovering any pregnant circumstances, the court sent Mingo with part of the militia to find the camp. Some historians believe Mingo deliberately led them away from any real hideout. Whether the camps existed or whether Mingo was inventing details to save himself remains unclear. But Bertie County became ground zero for the terror. White panic was especially evident in Bertie County, where 11 slaves were executed. The examinations were brutal. About 25 or 30 enslaved people were all privately examined on Friday and Saturday, without a possibility of any of them knowing what had been previously declared by others. The younger ones weren't whipped, they talked. The old ones and chiefs amongst them refused to acknowledge knowing anything about the plot. They were with the exception of 3 or 4 whipped, more or less, until they confessed. Of those examined, only 2 were convicted and hanged in Bertie's initial trials. But the others? They received a very severe reprimand and were made sensible of the folly and danger of their attempt, after which every one was chastised, more or less, according to his previous bad or good conduct, and ordered home. The panic was so intense that absurd rumors spread like wildfire. A report circulated in Winton that the town of Windsor had been burned by enslaved people. The town council sent a messenger by fast horse to verify. On his way, he met a messenger coming from Windsor who had been sent to Winton for the same reason. Neither town had burned. Everyone was chasing shadows. While executions proceeded in the North Carolina counties, authorities turned their attention to the Great Dismal Swamp. Militia forces were mobilized to find Tom Coppa's camp. When militia forces looked for his camp, Copper and his followers vanished into the swamp, showing how well they knew the land. They found nothing, or rather, they found a trackless wilderness that swallowed men whole. The swamp was 113,000 acres of sucking mud, poisonous snakes, and vegetation so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Even with tracking dogs, the militia couldn't penetrate to the interior islands where the maroons lived. Tom Copper had simply disappeared, back into the depths, back to his kingdom of shadows. By July, the panic had subsided. The immediate threat was over, if it had ever truly existed. In Halifax County, Virginia, Sancho was hanged along with Absalom, Frank, Martin, and Abram. The ferryman's conspiracy was broken. In North Carolina, the death toll was higher. At least 17 people were executed across the various counties, with 11 in Bertie County alone. Hundreds more were interrogated, whipped, and terrorized. But no uprising had actually occurred. No whites had been killed. No towns had burned. So what had really happened? Historians debate whether the Easter conspiracy was a genuine plot or largely a panic fueled by white paranoia. Organized in late 1801 and early 1802 by Sancho, the Easter plot finally grew so unwieldy that it snapped into 3 semi-autonomous schemes, thus diminishing its chances for success. It's likely that there were real conspirators. Sancho's network of rivermen was real, Tom Coppa's camp existed, and the connections between maroon communities were genuine. But as word spread, the conspiracy became distorted. Each county added its own fears and rumors. Enslaved people under torture said what interrogators wanted to hear. Informants like Mingo may have exaggerated or invented details. The line between reality and paranoia blurred until no one knew what was true. Do you think it was an act of injustice against the slaves, since no evidence was found against them? Drop your comment and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.